White heavy checkmark disclaimer. The following story is a fictional horror anthology inspired by eerie wilderness legends and terrifying encounters in the deep woods. It is meant for entertainment purposes only. However, some events may feel uncomfortably real if you're alone or listening outdoors. Please use headphones for full immersion and remember, some paths through the forest were never meant to be found. It started with a missing person report routine at first. 33-year-old Daniel Fryer, an experienced solo hiker from Oregon, had planned a week-long trek deep into the Appalachian Mountains. He left behind a detailed itinerary, GPS tracker, and his prized Nikon camera. But 5 days into his journey, his GPS sent out a single, sudden ping miles off trail, in an area marked as restricted habitat on forestry maps. Then silence. The search and rescue team was deployed within hours. Helicopters scanned the region, teams combed through dense foliage, and dogs followed cold trails. After 2 days, they found something strange, not a body, but Daniel's backpack neatly placed at the base of a mossy outcrop. Inside were water bottles, protein bars untouched. His journal, however, was filled with frantic entries, the last few scrawled in shaking handwriting. The earlier pages were calm. Daniel described sunsets over distant hills, deer crossing streams, and the joy of solitude. But after day 3, his tone changed. He wrote about noises at night, whispers in the wind, or something mimicking animal calls that didn't belong in those woods. On the 4th night, he woke to the sound of something brushing against his tent, followed by footsteps, soft, slow, circling him. He peeked outside and saw nothing, yet his heart raced with the certainty that something had been watching him. Day 5's entry was the most disturbing. "They don't walk like us," he wrote. "They crawl. On all fours. And they don't blink. I thought I saw a face in the trees last night, but when I shined my flashlight, it was gone. The woods feel alive, like they breathe when I do." Stranger still were the drawings. He'd sketched symbols in the margins, circles with jagged lines, stick-like figures with elongated arms, trees with eyes. One drawing showed what looked like a hole in the earth, wide like a mouth, with something clawing its way out. The last page wasn't writing, it was smeared with dirt and something darker, reddish-brown. Finger marks crossed it as though someone tried to tear the page mid-sentence. Rescue teams eventually followed Daniel's GPS ping to the designated location, but what they found defied explanation. The trees here grew too close together, branches interwoven like fingers clasped tight. The underbrush was undisturbed, no broken twigs, no footprints. But every single team member reported the same thing, the overwhelming sensation of being watched. One ranger refused to go further, whispering that he heard breathing right next to his ear, even though no one stood near him. A week later, the search was suspended. No signs of Daniel were ever found. No body, no clothing, not even boot prints. Just the journal and a lingering sense of dread. It became one of the Forest Service's coldest cases. Locals began to murmur that he'd wandered into a place not meant for humans. What they called the Hollow Woods. Old stories said these parts were cursed, haunted by something ancient, silent, and hungry. Something that could make you forget how to get out. Something that moved when you blinked. Years later, campers still report odd occurrences near the area Daniel vanished. Radios that pick up garbled voices at night, the sound of footsteps trailing behind them when they walk alone, and occasional glimpses of something pale moving between the trees. One camper found a rusted Nikon camera buried in the soil. The memory card was blank. Except for one photo. It was blurry but unmistakable, a figure crouched low beside a tree. Its limbs were too long, its head slightly tilted. It had no eyes, yet it stared straight into the lens. It was supposed to be the perfect weekend. 5 college friends, fresh off finals, decided to celebrate by camping in a remote section of Pine Hollow Forest. The area was notorious for being hard to navigate and even harder to leave if you strayed off the trails. That made it perfect for thrill-seekers like Jake, the unofficial leader of the group, who claimed he'd found the perfect hidden spot near a dried-up riverbed. Along for the ride were Lindsay, his girlfriend, Mateo, the jokester, Erica, who rarely spoke, and Drew, the skeptic. They set up camp by late afternoon. The sun filtered lazily through the dense canopy, birds chirped, and the only danger seemed to be mosquitoes. They lit a campfire, passed around beers, and played music on a Bluetooth speaker. The laughter echoed through the trees, harmless and carefree, until Jake brought out a crumpled piece of paper he'd printed from a paranormal subreddit. "Guys," he grinned, "have you ever heard of the Pact of the Hollow Flame?" Groans followed. Is this another one of your creepy rituals? Drew rolled his eyes. But Jake was already reading, to those who summon under fire and sky, offer words, not lies. Speak a truth, burn a token, and they will watch. And if your hearts are unclean, they'll come closer. He explained it was an old Appalachian legend, a way to summon watchers of the woods. The challenge was simple. Each person had to speak a secret aloud and burn something personal in the fire. It was supposed to draw the attention of the forest spirits. Sounds like campfire truth or dare, Mateo said, laughing. They all agreed to do it. It was harmless, after all, just a game. One by one, they went around. Lindsay admitted she cheated on a high school test. Erica whispered that she saw her father die and didn't cry. Drew scoffed and threw in a movie stub, muttering he didn't believe in any of this crap. Jake hesitated before throwing in a Polaroid of an old girlfriend. I once wished someone would disappear, he said quietly. The last was Mateo. He laughed, said he had no secrets, then jokingly threw in his shoelace. There, burn my stankfoot, he said. They all laughed. The fire crackled, the wind picked up, and just for a second, the flames turned green. That's when everything started to change. That night, Lindsay woke up to the sound of whispering. She thought it was Jake talking in his sleep until she turned and saw he was wide awake, staring at the tent wall. Did you hear that? He whispered. The whispers grew louder. Not English. Not any known language. Just strange, syllabic hissing. Erica screamed from her tent. They rushed over to find her alone, trembling, pointing toward the woods. I saw something, she sobbed. It was standing right there, watching me. It had no face. They tried to laugh it off, blaming it on too much beer or the wind. But when they looked around the campsite, all the ashes from the fire had been scattered into a perfect circle with 5 handprints pressed into the dirt around it. That morning, Mateo was gone. They searched for hours, shouting his name, calling his phone, leaving trail markers behind them, but it was like he had vanished into thin air. Drew insisted they head back to the car and call for help, but the trail markers they left were gone. Trees they hadn't seen before now blocked their path. It was as if the forest had changed its layout. We're going in circles, Jake muttered, growing pale. That night, they tried to stay awake, huddled by a weak fire. But around 2 a.m. something stepped into the edge of the clearing. It was tall, at least 7 feet, slender, almost like a human stretched too far. It stood perfectly still. When Jake shined the flashlight on it, it didn't move, but its shadow did. The shadow leaned forward like it was sniffing the air. Then it grinned. The group bolted in different directions. Lindsay screamed Jake's name, but he was already gone. Erica tripped, scraped her knees, and Drew didn't even stop. He just kept running until she couldn't hear him anymore. By morning, only Lindsay remained at the campsite. Alone. Shivering. 3 tents torn open. No blood, no signs of struggle. Just silence. And carved into the side of a tree near her 5 small handprints, all facing inward. They say she eventually made it out, found by hikers days later, wandering barefoot and muttering the same phrase over and over. We should never have told the truth. The Watkins family hadn't planned on anything sinister. Their annual summer trip was usually tame, mores, fishing, and stories around the fire. This year, however, Dale Watkins wanted something different. He booked a rustic camping spot miles from the nearest ranger station deep in Montana's Bitterroot Forest. Off-grid but safe, he told his wife, Mary. Their 2 kids, 13-year-old Alyssa and 10-year-old Ryan, were thrilled to sleep under open skies. They arrived on a cool Thursday afternoon, unpacked their gear, and pitched their tents beside a quiet creek. Everything seemed perfect. No cell signal, no traffic sounds, just the rustle of wind through pine trees and the occasional hoot of an owl. That first night, Mary read a ghost story aloud while the kids sipped hot chocolate. Everyone laughed at the cheesy ending. But Alyssa stopped smiling when she glanced at the trees and whispered, "There's someone over there." Dale shone a flashlight toward the woods. Nothing. Probably just a deer, he said, though he couldn't shake the feeling that something had moved. The next morning, Ryan found something odd beside the creek, a small, hand-carved wooden figure shaped like a man. It was primitive, with long arms, no mouth, and no eyes. Thinking it was a local trinket left by another camper, Dale shrugged it off. But Alyssa refused to touch it. "He's watching," she whispered. That evening, as the family roasted marshmallows, they heard twigs snapping beyond the treeline. Dale stood, alert. A figure emerged, an old man, barefoot, wearing tattered overalls and a hat too large for his head. His skin was pale like ash, his beard matted and dirty. But the strangest thing were his eyes. He didn't have any. Where his eyes should have been were smooth, scarred-over patches of skin, as if his face had never formed correctly. Yet somehow he still looked at them. He never blinked, never tilted his head, never moved. just stood there at the edge of their firelight. "Evening," Dale said nervously. "Can we help you?" The man didn't respond, just turned and walked away, slowly disappearing into the woods without a sound. That night, none of them slept well. Dale sat up with a knife in his lap. Mary kept the kids in their tent, whispering reassurances. But sometime around 3 a.m., Alyssa began to scream. Dale rushed to her tent, yanking it open. She was curled in a ball, sobbing. He was outside, right there. He was scratching at the tent. Claw marks were clearly visible on the fabric. 5 long, jagged lines. The next day, they packed up early. Dale led them toward their car, which was parked about 2 miles away down an overgrown trail. But when they reached the parking area, the car was gone. Not just gone. No tire tracks, no oil drips, no sign it had ever been there at all. Panic set in. They debated whether to hike out or stay put. Mary suggested waiting, thinking another camper or ranger would come. But as the hours dragged on, they realized something was wrong with the forest itself. The sun never seemed to move. Time felt stuck. Ryan pointed out that birds weren't chirping anymore. And Alyssa kept insisting they were being followed. Then came the second night. They didn't light a fire, didn't speak, huddled in silence as darkness closed in. At some point, Dale heard a twig snap behind him. When he turned, the eyeless man stood 5 feet away, closer than ever before. Still unmoving. Still watching. Dale lunged, swinging his knife. But the blade passed through thin air. The man was gone. From then on, the forest began to shift. Trails moved. Trees seemed different every few hours. Ryan disappeared for 2 full minutes after walking 10 feet away to use the bathroom. When he returned, he said, "The man with no eyes asked me if I liked my skin." They tried running, screaming, praying. Nothing helped. On the 4th night, Alyssa vanished. One moment, she was beside Mary. The next, her sleeping bag was empty. No sound. No footprints. Just her wooden figure placed on a stump nearby, its eyeless face turned toward the family's tent. Authorities found Dale and Mary 3 days later, barefoot, dehydrated, and rambling about, a man with no eyes and no voice. Ryan was never recovered. The forest was searched thoroughly, but no signs of the missing children or their car were ever found. Some locals say that part of Bitterroot should be sealed off. They believe the man with no eyes is a guardian of something older than time, something that doesn't like to be seen, but sees you just fine. Caleb Masters had been a hunter his entire life. The forests of northern Maine were his sanctuary, a place where he felt more at ease than in any town. He preferred silence, solitude, and the stillness of trees. So when his old hunting buddy Vince dared him to camp solo for a weekend deep in Blackroot Ridge, an area most locals avoided, Caleb didn't hesitate. The forest was dense and darker than others. There were no marked trails, no cabins, and barely any wildlife. Caleb arrived on a Thursday afternoon, parked his truck at the edge of a game trail, and hiked several miles in until he found a small clearing surrounded by ancient-looking trees. He set up camp, cooked some beans, and watched the stars rise over the black canopy above. Around midnight, he heard it for the first time, a whistle. It wasn't wind, bird, or animal. It was distinctly human. For notes, long, short, long. Faint, almost curious. Caleb paused, hand on his rifle, and waited. Nothing followed. Eventually, he told himself it was another camper and drifted off to sleep. But the next day, there were no footprints, no tents, no signs of anyone for miles around. He hunted a bit, brought down a rabbit, and returned to his camp by early afternoon. That night, just after he stoked the fire and sat down to eat, he heard the whistle again. For notes. Closer. Caleb stood up slowly, flashlight in hand, sweeping it across the tree line. Nothing. The beam caught nothing but brush and darkness. He whistled back. For several seconds, there was silence. Then the sound returned, this time from the opposite side of the clearing. For notes. The same pattern, but now slower, deliberate. Uneasy, Caleb sat with his rifle across his lap and stayed awake most of the night. By morning, he was convinced someone was messing with him. He packed a small bag, loaded his rifle, and decided to investigate. He followed the sound for nearly 2 hours, walking deeper and deeper into unfamiliar terrain. No trail, no markings. The trees became denser, older, and twisted. Finally, he stumbled upon a strange tree, tall, gnarled, and leafless, with bark that seemed to ripple like skin. At its base was a pile of bones. Not animal, human. femurs, ribs, a jawbone shattered, and among them a small rusted harmonica. Caleb didn't touch anything. He backed away slowly and turned around, but the trail he had followed was gone. No broken branches, no footprints, just forest. That night, the whistling returned. It circled him, echoing from every direction, louder and more frequent. Caleb started hallucinating, or so he thought. He saw things just beyond his firelight. Pale figures watching, hands curled around trees, heads tilted like broken dolls. No matter how many times he blinked or called out, they never moved. But they were always there. He tried to leave at dawn, hiking in the direction he thought was north. After hours of walking, he arrived back at his own campsite, despite never turning around. His footprints, his fire pit, and his half-eaten rabbit still lay waiting for him. The whistle came again, louder, closer. He knew then he wasn't allowed to leave. Over the next 2 days, Caleb kept a log in his field journal. He described how the forest seemed alive now. The trees shifted slightly when he looked away. Shadows lengthened against the direction of the sun. The whistling became constant, sometimes echoing inside his head, sometimes mimicked back in short bursts, like something learning how to do it. The last journal entry was written at night, scribbled and almost illegible. I buried the harmonica. I thought it might end. But now the tree whistles for itself. That was the last anyone ever heard from Caleb. 2 weeks later, a search team found his camp abandoned. No blood, no body, no rifle. But near a clearing several miles from where his GPS last pinged, they found a massive tree, its bark scarred with small carvings, like tally marks. At its base, a harmonica, still warm. And then one of the search team members whistled just to test it. From the tree came a reply. Aaron, a 31-year-old nature photographer from Vermont, had built a career around capturing the most remote and hauntingly beautiful parts of North America. His latest project, Forgotten Paths, focused on trails that had fallen out of use, those erased by time, storms, or government closure. A tip from a retired forest ranger brought him to the Black Hollow National Preserve, an expanse of deep forest on the border between West Virginia and Kentucky. The ranger had spoken of an old trail used in the 1940s by loggers, marked with handmade symbols carved into trees, symbols that had never been officially recorded or deciphered. The area wasn't on any modern maps. Aaron loaded his gear, GPS, spare batteries, and 2 weeks' worth of supplies, determined to locate and document the mysterious trail. He found the first marker 2 days in, a large, twisted pine with a triangle carved upside down near its base. From there, he followed more symbols, strange geometric shapes, spirals, and crude stick figures etched into trunks. The deeper he went, the quieter the forest became. No birdsong, no rustling squirrels, just the crunch of dead leaves beneath his boots and the rhythmic hum of his own breathing. But the strangest thing wasn't the silence. It was the realization that no matter how far he walked, his GPS refused to record a clear path. The signal blinked, jumped, and froze. His compass spun slightly even when he stood still. Still, Aaron pressed forward. He pitched camp by a dried-up creek bed, beside the largest marker yet. A symbol that looked like a human figure with tree branches for arms. That night, he noticed something odd while reviewing his camera footage. In several images, the carved symbols appeared fresher than when he photographed them, as if they were newly made between shots. The bark around them bled sap that wasn't there a moment earlier. The following morning, Aaron awoke to find a marker carved into his own tent. The same treeman symbol, same orientation, same depth of etching. But now it was facing the tent's entrance, as if warning him not to go forward. Spooked but intrigued, Aaron documented the tent and continued, unable to resist the mystery. The forest changed as he moved deeper. Trees grew unnaturally close together. The air smelled musty, thick, as if he were walking through breath instead of wind. Shadows lingered longer than they should. His watch stopped working. At one point, he thought he saw movement, a man standing in the woods, half concealed behind a tree. Dressed in old flannel and suspenders, his face obscured by darkness. Aaron called out, but the figure slipped behind the trunk and vanished. When he approached, there were no footprints. Just a newly carved symbol on the tree, an X over the human figure he'd seen before. By the 8th day, Aaron couldn't find the trail markers anymore. Instead, he began seeing trees that shouldn't have been there, trees with bark that pulsed slightly as if breathing. He tried to retrace his steps, but every attempt brought him back to the same clearing. That night, he recorded himself talking to the camera. It's like the trail isn't being followed, it's following me. I haven't seen the sun in 2 days. The moss is growing on the wrong side of the trees. I'm either hallucinating or something out here doesn't want to be mapped. He slept in shifts. Whispering woke him several times, his name spoken in a voice that almost sounded like his own. He started marking trees with his knife to create his own trail, but those marks would vanish by morning. Instead, the original symbols would reappear in slightly new positions, leading him farther and farther in. The final entry in Aaron's audio logs was frantic. There's no more path. I see the man now, the one the ranger warned me about. I thought it was folklore, but he's real. He walks between the trees without breaking branches. His head, it's made of bark. He is the trail marker. I think he marks the ones who come in and don't leave. Aaron Masters was never seen again. 3 months later, hikers found his camera hanging from a branch 50 feet above ground. The photos inside were mostly corrupted. All except one, the last image taken just before the camera died. It showed Aaron's tent, torn open. And behind it, a tall figure etched into a nearby tree, arms outstretched, bark for a face, a crude smile carved too deep to heal. Brett and Chloe were urban explorers, YouTubers known for venturing into forgotten tunnels, ghost towns, and restricted wilderness zones. When one of their subscribers sent them GPS coordinates with the chilling message, "They only come when it's dark. Bring flashlights, but don't leave them on too long." Brett thought it was just another internet hoax. But Chloe, ever the thrill seeker, insisted they follow up. The coordinates pointed to a remote area of Oregon's Tillamook State Forest. Dense, mountainous, and rarely traveled after dark. They loaded up with their usual gear, multiple cameras, drone equipment, headlamps, and a dozen high-powered flashlights. As they hiked deeper, Brett noticed the trees here grew unusually close together, blocking out most of the sun even in the afternoon. At around 4 p.m., they reached a mossy trail that wasn't on any map. A wooden sign nearby read, "No light beyond this point." It was worn, nearly rotted away, and written in some mix of red paint and what looked like dried blood. Chloe laughed it off as staged. "Someone's trying to scare us." But Brett was uneasy. They entered anyway. The path narrowed to the point that they had to walk single file, and an hour in, all signs of wildlife disappeared. No birds. No bugs. Just stillness. Then came the fog, low and swirling at their feet like something alive. At sunset, they made camp in a small clearing and prepped for night filming. Brett set up infrared cams while Chloe experimented with their new flashlight rig, which could pulse or strobe in multiple intensities. Around 9 p.m., while filming a monologue, Chloe stopped mid-sentence. "Did you hear that?" From the trees, a faint clicking. Like rocks being tapped together. Then a whisper. Right next to them. Even though no one was there. They spun around, flashlights aimed into the forest, but saw only fog and trees. The clicking continued. Getting faster. Closer. That's when Chloe's flashlight flickered. She smacked it and it came back on, but for a split second, something was visible in the beam. Something thin, pale, hunched low to the ground with limbs too long for its body. Its eyes, if you could call them that, reflected white like an animal caught in headlights. It ran straight back into the woods. Brett shouted, "Did you see that? What the hell was that?" They decided to stay put but kept the flashlights on, scanning constantly. Then the batteries started draining. Not gradually, but instantly. One flashlight after another clicked off, despite being fully charged hours ago. Panicking, Brett tossed more logs onto the fire, but it didn't help. The clicking noises now came from every direction. Then came a low growl, impossibly deep, vibrating through their feet. Suddenly, one of their cameras was hurled from its tripod. Brett turned to grab it and stopped dead. A figure stood just beyond the edge of the firelight. 7 feet tall. No face, no clothes. Its skin was the color of ash with joints that bent the wrong way. As Brett aimed his flashlight, it hissed and disappeared into the trees like smoke. "They don't like flashlights," Chloe whispered. "They don't like being seen." They decided to leave that night. Bags on, lights in hand, they bolted back the way they came. But the trail had changed. Trees they passed hours ago now looked completely unfamiliar. The clicking followed them, echoing from both sides. Chloe screamed. Brett turned and saw her being dragged backward, feet kicking, flashlight spinning wildly before it shut off. He ran to where she vanished, yelling her name, but found only claw marks in the mud, and a flashlight, still warm. He kept moving, sobbing, whispering apologies to no one. Eventually, he emerged near the original trailhead. Alone. Authorities found him 2 days later, dehydrated and in shock. He refused to speak, barely reacted to questioning. The only words he ever said, quietly, were, "You have to keep the lights on, but not too long. They don't like flashlights." Chloe was never found. Her last video clip, recorded seconds before her flashlight died, was uploaded automatically from her cloud-connected GoPro. It ends with her whispering, "I think they only exist when we look at them." Then static. Walter Reeves was a linguist turned recluse. After a failed marriage and a series of professional embarrassments, he retreated to a small cabin on the edge of the Bitterroot Mountains in Montana. He spent his days reading obscure dialects and reconstructing extinct languages, trying to stay away from people. But even in solitude, Walter had a weakness, his curiosity, especially when it came to words that shouldn't exist. It started with a journal he found in a thrift store in Missoula. The cover was blank, the pages yellowed and water-damaged. Inside were entries dated sporadically between 1936 and 1941, written by someone named Ellis R. Milner, a surveyor for the U.S. Forest Service. The journal described mapping a section of forest that didn't seem to stay still, coordinates that shifted, paths that looped. He referred to it as the wordless grove. But in later entries, he began calling it something else. A name in no known language, Nurakesh. Walter was fascinated. The journal detailed how Ellis heard that name whispered in his sleep, saw it carved into bark where no one else had been, and how he began to feel that the forest wanted to be called that as though it were incomplete without a name. The deeper Ellis ventured, the more obsessed he became with speaking the name aloud, until one final entry, "I've said it now. I've spoken it to the trees. I belong to it." Walter, intrigued and skeptical, decided to find the grove himself. It took him 3 weeks of research and cross-referencing old survey maps, but eventually he pinpointed the most likely area, a secluded valley with no current name, marked only as Zone 5F on old forestry records. He hiked in with a notebook and audio recorder, eager to document something strange, even if it turned out to be natural. But almost immediately, things felt wrong. Trees grew in spirals, some even bending toward each other unnaturally. Moss grew on every side of every tree, not just the north. On his second day, Walter found a stone monolith, smooth, 5 feet tall, and covered in faint carvings that resembled the characters in Ellis's journal. The name Nurakesh was scratched near the base, fresh despite the age of the stone. That night, Walter had dreams of being underground, roots wrapping around his limbs like vines. He heard a voice, low, genderless, slow and echoing. "Speak me, complete me, be my memory." He awoke in sweat, heart pounding. But still, he stayed. The following days were filled with strange phenomena. His compass spun erratically. His food began to spoil even when sealed. Audio recordings picked up background whispering in multiple tones. And worse, his own notes began to include the name Nurakesh, even when he swore he didn't write it. Walter finally understood the forest didn't just want to be named. It wanted to be remembered, spoken, kept alive through the tongue. The survival was linguistic. It fed on belief and repetition. And it was getting stronger. On his final night, Walter recorded himself whispering the name over and over, Nurakesh. Nurakesh. I give you my voice. I give you my name. The tape ends with the sound of bark creaking. Then silence. Weeks later, hikers found his gear abandoned, his tent torn but undisturbed. The only thing intact was his recorder, still running, with 14 hours of audio, most of which was the name Nurakesh being whispered in dozens of different voices. Since then, hikers in the Bitterroots have reported strange carvings appearing on trees overnight. A few even say they've woken up saying the name out loud with no memory of dreaming. Linguists who've analyzed the audio say the name doesn't fit into any human language. Its syllables don't match phonetic patterns in Latin, Germanic, or Indo-European roots. One expert said it best, it sounds like a word trying to invent itself, like something alive, waiting for us to give it meaning. If you're ever walking through deep woods and you feel the urge to name the trees, resist it. Don't speak to the silence. And never give the forest your voice. Dylan and Meredith were experienced backpackers, the kind who preferred forging their own way through the wilderness rather than following trails. Their most recent trip brought them to the San Juan National Forest in Colorado, planning a quiet 5-day loop off-grid. The area was dense with alpine trees, glacial creeks, and almost zero cell service, exactly the kind of silence they craved. By day 3, they were deeper in the woods than planned, having gotten turned around after a rock slide blocked a key pass. They weren't panicked, just tired and ready to rest. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees, they came upon a clearing neither of them remembered passing before. In the center of the clearing was a camp. 3 small tents, all the same make and color. A smoldering fire pit. Folding chairs. And backpacks leaning against tree trunks. Everything looked recently used, but no one was around. Dylan called out, thinking maybe a group had gone to collect water or hike a nearby ridge. No response. Meredith felt uneasy. Why would they leave their packs behind? They circled the site. The tents were zipped shut, the fire still warm, and the boots outside the tents looked unworn. The weirdest part? Everything was identical to their own setup. Same model of gear? Same lantern. Even the same color pattern on one of the sleeping bags visible through the mesh. Meredith's voice trembled. This looks like our stuff. Dylan brushed it off, but the resemblance was undeniable. Even the coffee tin left near the fire pit was the same brand they brought, an obscure local roast only sold in their hometown. As night fell, they debated what to do. Hike on in the dark or camp nearby. Dylan chose the latter, insisting they stay 50 yards away from the strange sight. They pitched their own tent just beyond the treeline and kept their lights low. Around midnight, they woke to the sound of zippers. Dylan peered out of their tent. The mysterious camp was now occupied. He could see shadows moving inside the tents. Figures hunched, barely moving, like they were just sitting still, staring toward the woods. Meredith whispered, "What if they were never gone? What if they were waiting for night?" They kept silent, afraid to draw attention. But just before dawn, they heard something even worse. Footsteps. Not at the other camp, but circling their own tent. Soft, slow, careful. Then came a voice, eerily similar to Dylan's. "Why are you in our spot?" They didn't answer. They held their breath. The voice circled again, and this time Meredith's voice responded, "You shouldn't be here." The steps faded. When daylight finally came, Dylan and Meredith emerged from their tent, but the other camp was gone. No tents. No fire. No footprints. Just flattened grass where the gear had been. But as they packed to leave, Dylan found something tucked into the top pocket of his backpack. A Polaroid photo, blurry and dark, clearly taken at night. It showed their tent the night before from the outside. The flashlight was on inside, but someone or something was standing in front of it. A tall, shadowy figure half-facing the camera. That night, they hiked all the way to the main trail, not stopping until they reached their car. Meredith deleted their GPS track, terrified the woods would somehow remember them. Years later, Dylan got a package in the mail. No return address. Inside was a single item, another Polaroid. It showed the same clearing. Same camp. Same tents. But this time, they were inside it. 13.